Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus, episode 74. I am the show's host, Kyle. Today's show I'm going to be focusing a little bit on the Venezuela situation, just getting everybody caught up so you know kind of the basics of the situation for when the warmongers start advocating for some kind of U.S. intervention in Venezuela. You're prepared for some basic facts on the situation. People love to manipulate on the basic facts, and that's how they get everything worked up and out of control. So if that's something you or somebody you know may be interested in, please go to foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com and click the share button from there. Facebook, Twitter, whatever you got, it's all very helpful. Anybody who does it, I really thank you so much. It's helping the show to grow. It's so encouraging to be a podcast host of a show that's getting more downloads every episode. So for those of you who are doing that for me, thank you, and let's get into it. Starting off with Venezuela, just, I guess, a brief history to get us caught up. I'm going to run through this really fast. There's a whole bunch of nuance I'm not going to get into, and that's partly because I didn't have, time to read a history of Venezuela, but also, no, most people aren't going to get into that much detail, and what you need to know, I think, is mostly in the current events. But going back, Hugo Chavez came to power in 1988 after confidence in the prior regime fell apart. I don't think there was any kind of actual revolution. They call it the Bolivarian Revolution, I believe, or Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela, but I don't think there was battles in the streets or anything like that. Chavez immediately installed a more socialist-type government and looked for constitutional reform as well. This leads up to a 2002 coup d'etat where Chavez actually lost power for a couple days. Protests from people in the streets came out, and that's what got Chavez back into power. And then there was a strike from 03 to 04, or 02 to 03, or 03 to 04, where a whole bunch of state employees were striking. And it was a rough time for Venezuela during this strike because socialist country, and when the oil workers in Venezuela aren't working, there's now a whole lot of capital production going on, and so there's just not a lot of economic commerce, and so people get poor very quickly. So from, it seems like kind of the late thousands and then into the early 2010s is a relatively successful time for Venezuela. It's a socialist state. It was selling oil. Of course, the 2001 and 2001 war in Afghanistan, the 2003 war in Iraq, certainly caused more and more chaos in the Middle East and led to a rise in oil prices as well as other factors, leading to an increase in the rise of oil use and then the cost of it as well. In 2013, Hugo Chavez dies, and I believe it's Rodrigo Maduro, but Maduro takes power and is in control from 2013 to the present. Starting really in 2014, there were a lot of protests. Several people have died in these protests over the years. I read 50 died. I think that's total, but the latest round of protesting has seen probably close to 100 people dead now. I know the numbers from the round of protesting prior to the opposition elections was in the upper 50s, and now I've seen reports between 20 and 30 people being killed in the protests post government election results, which was Sunday. Especially during Maduro's time in office, we see a rise in the technology and ability to obtain unobtainable oil before, making oil far less valuable. And when you're a socialist country with the main export of oil and oil prices drop drastically, things don't go well. I believe Venezuela is just about completely out of money in their reserves now. Their cash is worthless or nearly worthless on the black market. They trades like 400 or so to 1 Venezuelan bolivars to US dollars. People are getting arrested for smuggling toilet paper, toiletries, basic foods, wheat, flour into Venezuela from neighboring countries. I mean, you see pictures of checkpoints, people getting busted with bags of white powder, and it's not cocaine, it's flour. People need to eat, and they're trying to smuggle in. The government won't allow it because that, of course, a black market is still a market in itself, and any market is a threat to a communist state. And so the situation right now in Venezuela is not very good. Throughout this time, the Venezuela has really moved away from the United States and vice versa. The Venezuela, Hugo Chavez referred to Bush, I think, as the Great Satan or something like that. Of course, for Chavez's side of it, and probably from his viewpoint, the U.S. has certainly meddled a lot in South and Latin America. A lot of this meddling was against communist regimes, especially during the Cold War, and they funded a lot of really bad, more fascist type people. And so while, somebody may not support the communists, you certainly say that the United States did the wrong thing by supporting the fascists or, whatever kind of Pinochet type leaders that rose up in other countries. And then since then, as the relationship has deteriorated, the U.S. has put several different rounds of sanctions either on the Venezuelan oil company. Upper members of the Venezuelan government are military, and then I think there may be some general sanctions against the country of Venezuela as well. One of the things that has occurred lately is political arrest. The Maduro government has arrested several people who are opposition party members and not guilty of any actual crimes. Some of these people were opposition leaders who were forbidden to speak out and did so. Other people were justices appointed by the opposition court or opposition Congress, and so for that reason the government arrested them. Arrests like these have, like I said, have been occurring for several years. Another thing that occurred in Venezuela through the time of Hugo Chavez and Maduro is the Supreme Court gained a lot of power, and I guess over that time the leaders were able to pat the court with favorable justices. And so, while in America we often have this view of, kind of the court on high and, what the court says go, and they're not biased by things like, age, sex, gender, or, like political affiliation. It's all about just, you got the scale, you got one side, you got other, weighing them and making a judgment based off of that, right? And, this isn't the case of what's happening in Venezuela. The Supreme Court has delegitimized the Constitutional Congress that is led largely by the opposition to the president because the people are tired of living under the cruddy communist regime there. I mean, you also have the Venezuelan Supreme Court revoking the kind of First Amendment rights of some opposition leaders when they spoke out and then were then forced to go to jail. It would be really interesting if somebody maybe did a case study on kind of judicial tyranny in Venezuela. I think a lot of times of the three kind of branches of governments that we view, the judicial, the legislative, and the executive, people tend to feel the most comfortable empowering the judicial because somehow courts are always, these enlightened great justices. But going back to the Venezuela story, 2 weeks ago, or about 3 weeks ago now, we had 7.5 million people come out and vote in favor of forming a new court system in Venezuela. These elections were ran and held by the opposition. From what I could tell, they do seem like pretty good elections in the sense that they were legitimate. The reported results does seem to be reflective of the polling of the people who voted, and so, that's, I guess, a good thing, and the vote was pretty overwhelmingly for a new Supreme Court. Some of those justices that the National Assembly has, the Venezuelan Congress has already appointed to the Supreme Court have been arrested and are being held as political prisoners. On Sunday, Maduro holds an election. This election is for a referendum vote on giving Maduro the power to appoint a new Congress, and the seats wouldn't be voted on. They would just be appointed by whoever Maduro wants, and maybe they would need a Supreme Court rubber stamp. Maduro claims that 8.5 million people voted in this election, and kind of pointing to the opposition saying, ha ha ha, like, more people voted mine, so mine's more legitimate. The opposition claims only around 2.4 million people voted in that election, and independent kind of people who monitor polling and stuff like that say that that's more reflective than the government number. And so it does seem to me that the popular support is behind the opposition to get rid of the current Venezuelan government and install a new system of government somehow. However, 2.4 million people is a pretty significant minority. Also, this only represents around 33% or so of the Venezuelan population that I think is just over 30 million. This would represent about 10 million between the two elections. As I talked about before, the U.S. has continued to put sanctions on Venezuela. Some of those sanctions were in response to the government the government election over the weekend, and then the protests that broke out after that killed, like I said, between 20 and 30. And now we're hearing kind of rumblings. Even sitting across from my coworker a couple days ago, somebody was talking about how we just had to do something in Venezuela because of how bad it was getting there. And, nobody really thinks about, through what it means to do something in Venezuela. Do you mean go to war there? Do you mean drop bombs on the people there? Yeah, those people are suffering, but you got, consider the alternative, that the alternative is, probably 20 years worth of war and nation building by the United States in their country, where millions, if not, tens of millions of people could end up dead. I mean, it could really be nasty, these kind of civil wars that happen, especially, in places where there's, maybe ethnic or religious differences that divide the different groups, and then it kind of seems to turn to this extinction kind of game that people play. A lot of this is what we've seen in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places. So there's kind of the layout of the basic facts, what's been going on, what's been happening. So when people talk about, you have some idea of what's going on, and if they're, making stuff up too bad and whatnot. I will say it seems that any rumblings I've heard from government about wanting maybe to do some more intervention in Venezuela has come from the National Security Council. So I would keep my eyes on McMaster and possibly his aide, General Derek Harvey. That's Venezuela going forward. I hope all of you enjoyed kind of my look into that and analysis there. I'm going to get into some other news stories and more touch on them and run down pretty quick here. Got some more Trump news. The first is that Trump apparently made the decision to end the CIA weapons program to Syrian rebel groups after he saw the video of the Al-Zinki group beheading that boy. I've talked about it on the podcast in the past. I think there's like 5 20 to 30-year-old terrorists in the back of the truck, and then this 8-year-old little boy is kind of sitting in the hands of one of the terrorists, and the terrorist is petting his head, and then he slices off the boy's head. It's one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen. Showing the boy affection like that before so gleefully cutting his head off is really just disturbed me. And so Trump saw this and was obviously disturbed and found out that we were arming that rebel group. Which, all these liberal people are beating Trump up for ending that program, but I think that video should have ended the program for America at the time, and you have to wonder why, Obama didn't have the compassion to say, oh my God, we're backing these psychotic killers and giving them weapons of war. We're giving them tow missiles. We're thinking about giving them surface-to-air missiles. We're giving them rifles and guns and night vision and all these kinds of stuff. And then they chop a boy's head off. To me, that should have been like the story, that I changed my mind. This is obviously wrong. These people are sociopaths, like the sickest kind of people that there are. And so arming them or empowering them in any way is a setback. But that's not what happened. And then Trump saw the video and decided to make that decision. So in this case, good for Donald Trump. Nothing wrong with praising the man when he's right every once in a while, and then criticizing him when he's wrong, like he is very wrong about the Iran nuclear deal. Apparently, Trump and Rex Tillerson are in disagreement on this deal. Tillerson would like to keep it in place, and Trump would like to get rid of it. Let's root for Tillerson on this one. Hopefully, he's able to sway Trump to keep the Iran nuclear deal around. I think with the sanctions bill, Europe might have a lot more to say about the Iran nuclear deal, and maybe this is a way we could get some people to put pressure on Trump. After the sanctions bill is really going to hurt Europe, Europe could say, well, hey, you got to keep these sanctions in place on Iran. That way we can make up some of the economic loss we're taking by not being able to trade as much with Russia. In Afghanistan, I've read reports that Trump is considering either having a drawdown, which obviously would be an awesome decision, or escalating, trying to protect Afghani minerals. To me, it seems like the kind of businessman leader Trump has been, that the mineral option may be the one he goes towards. That option is going to take some power away from China, who I guess has access to a lot of these minerals as well, and getting them on the market would be a good thing. U.S. would probably have to provide security for this. Private contractors are a big option in this plan, which seems to be a lot of what Trump's cabinet is pushing. And so I think this deal, this is kind of the result I'm worried about, is that we're going to go into Afghanistan, rob the Afghani people of their wealth, get a whole bunch of Americans and Afghanis killed in the process, and everybody being worse off at the end of the day. Lindsey Graham came out and said that Trump is ready to go ahead and attack North Korea if he feels like America is going to be attacked. I guess in a way we've already known this, but Lindsey Graham made it pretty clear that Trump's kind of ready to push the button at any moment, which is very scary, very disturbing. Sessions for his part, Graham for his part just seems so happy that Trump may kill a whole bunch of North Koreans and being like, yeah, we gotta kill him. I mean, that's what we gotta do. Tillerson said that the U.S. wants to talk to North Korea, but then laid out impossible guidelines to make anyways. He said North Korea has to give up their nuclear weapons program and their missiles program. Obviously not going to happen. I mean, even if North Korea were to give up their, nuclear weapons program, they may want to keep their missiles program just to at least make threats to other countries around them in case the United States tries to do what, the U.S. did to Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi, who, after they gave up their weapons of mass destruction program, the U.S. went in and killed them. I read reports that the Pentagon and the State Department are looking to create programs to send arms to Ukraine. This would obviously ignite tensions with Russia over the Crimea issue. Of all the kind of places on Russia, this seems to be the one that Trump himself is worst on, seeming to believe that Russia did somehow steal Crimea from Ukraine and that the Crimeans didn't choose to leave Ukraine for Russia. I listened to an interview with Pat McGehee, who a member of the House of Delegates, which is the lower house in the legislative branch in West Virginia. He's trying to pass a bill that would basically say that the West Virginia National Guard could not be used by anyone or for any reason other than the constitutionally stated reasons, and really points out how the U.S. government has been using the National Guard as like a draft force to be able to take people who never signed up to go overseas and fight and to get them to do so. I also saw a pretty disturbing video of a Border Patrol agent forcing a 16-year-old boy crossing the border to drink meth and die. Very disturbing story, very disturbing video. I mean, this is the kind of thing, right, that the cartels do. The cartels are thinking like, oh, somebody's trying to rip me off, and the only way they could, solve the problem is by having somebody test the water. So they tell the guy to drink it, the guy has to drink it, and then he, dies from meth overdose. But this isn't supposed to happen in, the white market and the government market, because they have test kits and they could test the water and see if it's meth, and that way they can make their decision without forcing a human guinea pig to be dead at 16. In Turkey, the trial has begun for 468 conspirators, alleged conspirators of the coup d'etat in last year's July coup in Turkey. Many of these people are military personnel, including some generals on trial. They're accused of murder, attempted assassination of Erdogan, and then a few other crimes. I have no doubt that they will be found guilty, depending on what you think of Erdogan and the whole Turkish situation. I guess you could decide for themselves that they did something immoral or not, but just to keep that on your radar. A few stories out of Afghanistan. We have at least 30 people, maybe up to 50 people being killed at a Shia mosque in Afghanistan near the Iranian border. It looks like ISIS is claiming responsibility for this attack. We have a new Inspector General for Afghanistan released. Every year this report comes out and it just tells us how wasteful the war in Afghanistan is. One of the things we're getting out of the report early is that the U.S. wasted $500 million in attempting to train Afghani intelligence officers. A lot of this money was spent on who knows what because there was a lack of oversight in the program, and so we don't know what the money was spent on and if there were any real results from it. The money was spent from 2010 till today. And then we also have a report saying that the U.S. is giving Afghanistan too much money and is basically just creating corruption, making the country worse. If you're giving out too much free money, it could actually be a bad thing for a country. I think everybody always assumes like giving money to poor, to like just groups of people that are poor, like we kind of view the Afghanis, is always going to be a solution. But what happens is that corrupt people kind of get in the middle and start to say, oh yeah, give me the money and I'll do this for everyone and I'll build this or that or whatever. And it just leads to a lot of corruption. Then the people end up getting worse off because they're not getting any of the funding that's supposed to be coming in. And then the capitalists have no reason to drive business to people if it's easier to get money from the government over getting the money by selling a product to people. Last thing I want to update, and that is Yemen. We have the Red Cross estimating that 1 in 45 Yemeni people will get cholera, the most recent outbreak. This is unimaginable, really, what's going on in Yemen. Right now, the Saudi-led coalition is preventing any fuel from getting to the north of Yemen, and so what this is preventing is, aid planes from landing in Sana'a, dropping off some aid, and then flying back out. The planes need, more, to refuel at Sana'a, but there's just no fuel to put into the planes because Saudi Arabia won't let any boats bring the fuel in. We also had the problem with Saudi Arabia just providing, kind of strangling Yemen of fuel in general, not having any fuel to run the water treatment plants and thus spreading cholera everywhere. I originally saw reports of this, people kind of claiming that Saudi Arabia is conducting some kind of chemical or disease warfare in Yemen by their actions there. And at first I thought this was a little hyperbolic and ridiculous, but now this seems absolutely correct. What Saudi Arabia is doing is they're preventing any humanitarian aid needed to stop this cholera outbreak from getting into Yemen. They're preventing any food needed to get in. Basically any way that anybody could possibly not die of cholera. There's so many different ways Saudi Arabia is blocking. Rather than letting small amounts of fuel in so that planes could retake off from the Sana'a airport and allow people to get the medicine they need to survive cholera and some food so they don't starve to death and some fuel so they can drink clean water. Saudi Arabia is stopping that at any turn, thinking that somehow if they could just isolate the people in northern Yemen enough, they'll eventually give in. Unfortunately, it looks like it's just going to kill everyone first. Of course, there seems to be an irony of this, especially for the United States, who's actively refueling airplanes all the time above the skies of Yemen to drop bombs on the Yemeni people, but the United States government will do nothing to help one poor little aid group from being able to get some goods into the city of Sana'a by letting their plane refuel at the Sana'a airport. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's unthinkable. It's so disturbing. The one, kind of consistency maybe emerging from Trump's foreign policy is that he re-adds to videos of dying children. So, not to be exploitive of dying children, but man, maybe if somebody shows Trump a video of some poor children in Yemen dying, he might change his mind on that war. Alright, that'll wrap up my show for today. I hope everybody enjoyed the show. Foreign Policy Focus episode 74. It will be up on foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com. Also on my Facebook page, Kyle's Files, and the private Facebook group, Foreign Policy Focus. My personal website is kylesfilesblog.com, and I also blog at thelibertarianinstitute.org. My Twitter handle is KYAAALE, and I will see you all on Friday.